All right, guys. So I've been following Jordan's work all off season, and I'm pumped to finally actually meet him because all his stuff is awesome. So he's an NFL draft analyst for the Draft Network, a former D1 QB coach and recruiting coordinator, and he's got a podcast, the Reid Option Podcast. So Jordan, thanks for joining us, man. I appreciate you.
Absolutely, Tim. It's a pleasure to finally get to talk ball with you in person. I'm excited to be on.
I'm pumped up because we got a lot of young quarterbacks that listen to this and watch all this stuff. And you've you've done everything. You know what it's like being under center. You've coached it, and then you've also recruited some of these guys. So I think you'll be a huge asset for them. But talk to us a little bit about your journey. For the people listening who don't know, your exact story. Talk to us a little bit about, going that transition from playing to coach to kind of what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I'll start all the way back with my playing days. I originally was a basketball player growing up. I had no interest in football at all, but my dad didn't think I was tough enough. So he went to the park. I thought we were going to shoot some hoops, and he signed me up for football. Surprisingly, he didn't think I was tough or anything. So I go out my first day of practice, had no idea what I was doing, and I just throw the ball and just playing catch with the coach. And he's standing like 30 yards back, and he was like, "Whoa, hold on." He was like, I can't believe you threw it that far. He was like, do that again. And so I just launched it like 35 yards after that. So he was like, okay, you're playing quarterback. You're going to be our quarterback from here on out. So that's really, and that was at like when I was 9 years old. So I've been playing quarterback ever since that point. Never played any other position, never played defense, wide receiver, running back, anything. I've always been a quarterback my entire life. So this is something that, I live and die for. Quarterback is something that I always enjoyed. That's my pride and joy. That's my baby. So after that, I was an FCS player coming out. I didn't get to play my senior year of high school. I tore my meniscus. I had surgery after that. So unfortunately, I didn't get to play my senior year of high school. So I ended up going to a small school called North Carolina Central University. It's a small FCS program. It's right near Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, about 5 minutes away from that. So went there, played quarterback, started for 3 years from 2010 to 2013. Then after that, didn't have any pro aspirations. I wanted to walk by the time I was 30 years old. Just got tired of taking those hits in the pocket. So I went right into coaching. After that, I was a graduate assistant for 2 years at my alma mater. And then we had a coach, a running backs coach, get a head coaching position at a local college. And then I transitioned right into that. And then I coached quarterbacks after that as well. So I've been able to see the game from so many different lenses. I was coaching for 5 years, all 5 years at North Carolina Central. Fantastic time. Was able to win 3 conference championships while I was there. So recruiting coordinator is something I did my last 2 years when I was there. That's really where I fell in love with scouting, sitting in living rooms with moms and dads and being able to watch thousands of huddle links a week. That's something that I really enjoyed. So that's really where my love for scouting came into the equation, putting the puzzle pieces together, putting championship teams together, recruiting, just getting to learn the background stories of players, understanding their whys. That's really where I fell in love with scouting. So after that, we were unfortunately let go in 2018. We had a coaching change. They ended up not keeping the interim head coach that was there. So I had to figure out another route. Journalism is something that I've always had a passion for. I was that kid that used to sit in front of the TV and watch back when the draft was 3 days long. I used to sit in front of the TV and watch it the entire time. My parents was like, man, get out in front of the TV, go outside and play. So I wanted to figure out a way I could combine journalism. I had 2 twin daughters at the time on the way as well. So I wanted a little bit more job security at the time. So I wanted to figure out how I can combine football and journalism. And there was a company that was an upstart company called the Draft Network, and they were looking for somebody that had various different types of backgrounds of experience. So I got lucky landing this gig, man.
That is so awesome. What's one thing, because there are so many young quarterbacks that watch this and just young football players. What's one thing, if I'm a high school kid, from your experience as a recruiting coordinator, what's one thing I can do? Is it the way I approach you, like on DM or email? What's one thing that you remember, hey, always made a kid stand out when it came to not his play, right? Because they can either play at a certain level or they can't. But what was one thing kind of in interacting with kiddos that you walked away and thought, man, that was impressive?
Well, just put various different types of plays on the beginning, just because I think what happens and what a lot of young quarterbacks fall victim to is that they want to put those high arcing go balls, and there's like 10 or 12 of them at the beginning. Don't be scared to, throw what I like to call grip it and rip it throws, of where you're just ripping a hitch to the right sideline and you're showing good footwork. Little things like that are stuff that we look for. Put some intermediate throws if you have a nice dig over the middle, or, a 10 to 12 yard curl where you're firing right into the guy's eyes. Like, don't be scared to put that on there, just because I think that's something that a lot of young quarterbacks, they just get so fixated on. I have to put my explosive plays I have to put my explosive plays on the beginning of highlight tapes. Don't be scared to mix it up a little bit. So that definitely would be a word of advice that I put on there. And then don't be scared to, put some whiteboard stuff up on there as well. Talking some your way through some coverages or some concepts that you guys might have, or a concept that you feel comfortable explaining. I think that's something that is a little bit different that I've seen from some quarterbacks, of them actually being up on the whiteboard. And it's not necessarily putting it on your highlight tape, but just having it in your huddle link somewhere on your profile.
That's awesome. I remember I was watching some random kid sent me his highlights, and it was from like Montana, and his first clip was a 3x1 hot adjustment. And I was like, that's my kind of guy.
Yeah.
Like anyone who's putting a hot adjust on his highlights.
Absolutely.
I can work with that. So what's up, so this was my first year kind of doing the pre-draft stuff. And I found it interesting because I watched a lot of guys like you, that had played quarterback before. And I feel like there was a different level. And again, I think it's all learned, right? You can learn what you're looking at with the tape. But I do think, having faced live bullets like you had for 3 years in college gives you a whole new perspective. What's something that maybe when you look at the tape, you kind of feel like you're able to do because you played quarterback, that maybe a guy who doesn't have that luxury when you're evaluating these college prospects coming out? What's something that you kind of feel like, man, this helps me a ton comparatively to kind of all the other analysts out there?
Well, it's just different when you've actually been back there. And like you said, you've been faced with those live bullets. There's so many different layers that you can peel back playing the quarterback position. I'll just give an example. Like I was watching Spencer Rattler last night, and something that he has a problem with is that, and you can attest to this, whenever he's throwing a quick slant, he'll take a big three and a hitch. And I'm like, I mean, you can't do that. You're going to be late every single time. And if I've never played the position for before, and I see him taking those drops, and then why he's so late on the throws, I'm not thinking why he's taking a quick three and then the hitch. I don't have that sense of understanding, and then just being able to understand that different type of layer of football, if that makes sense. So just little details and nuances of playing the position, and then reading concepts as well. Watching guys like Lincoln Riley and then Phil Longo from Carolina. I was watching Sam Howell too, just watching the different types of creativity that they have with concepts. I can see what my first, my second, my third, or my fourth read is based on what the coverage is. And if I don't know how to read coverages, or I don't understand what cover three or cover two is against these certain types of concepts, high low middle or high low sideline types of concepts, I'm not really going to understand what maybe Sam Howell was looking at here, what Spencer Rattler was looking at here. So there's just so many different layers to peel back, Tim, and you can put yourself in their shoes of why they were late on the throw, or maybe why they took the check down here as opposed to taking a deep shot down the sideline.
Yeah, I think it's so cool when guys, like when I was looking at your work and how you break it down, I think it's so cool because it helps people, right? Because it is, we're never going to be in those meeting rooms, right? I don't know exactly how Lincoln installs drive, but I have a good idea that they start with the shallow and get to the basic, right? And that's where it's, through your experience, that probably helps you a ton. Let's jump into those rookie QBs, because I do think it kind of, the way it shook out, I think is going to be interesting, because I think there's some really great fits the more I've watched the tape. Trevor Lawrence, it's tough because the Jacksonville guys haven't been there. But one I'd like to start with, because I just watched him was Fields with Chicago. Because when they first traded up for him, I was like, oh man, I was so high on Fields. I was like, oh, I don't want him to go to die in Chicago. But when you actually watch the Chicago stuff, there's a lot of similarities with what Ohio State was doing. I mean, talk to us. What do you think of that fit? And then kind of what's your excitement level for Fields going up there to Chicago? And the fact that I couldn't believe he was around at pick 11.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you hear all the pre-draft narratives and things out there about him. I thought a bunch of it was BS, but a lot of stuff is media driven right now. You can tell who does the work and who doesn't do the work, and who puts the times in and actually studies these kids. But as far as the fit, I mean, Justin Fields is an incredible fit in Matt Nagy's offense, just because there were some things that he wanted to do last year that he tried to do with Trubisky, but he just wasn't able to do it. So Nagy likes to move the pocket. He likes to change the launch point a lot. And we saw that with Fields. He's really good with throwing on the run, but also the mobility factor that he brings to the table. And Trubisky's a decent athlete for the most part, but I don't think he has the dynamic ability like a Justin Fields does have. Like, he's not 6'2", 230, and he's not running a 4.4. So it's just a different level of athleticism that he brings to the table. And I think his arm strength is much stronger than Trubisky's was. He's much more accurate down the field as well. So there's just a different type of dynamic that he brings to the table. And I think an underrated factor about Justin is that at Ohio State, they didn't really use him a lot on design runs. And that's something that I really noticed about his film. And I think Nagy is probably going to want to incorporate him a little bit more in that design QB run game, just because it's different when you're playing on 10 versus 11 and 11 on 11. When you have the quarterback, you can use that running back as an extra blocker now, as opposed to, the quarterback being strictly a runner. So I really like his fit in that offense. And I think some of the stuff that Nagy was trying to do beforehand, I think he's going to be able to do now more consistently.
I'm not going to lie. When I was watching Fields' tape, I was like pissed at Ohio State's coaches because there's so many times where I just felt like he was underutilized. And I feel like, and there was a lot of narratives that got pushed pre-draft that were wrong about him. But I honestly feel like if Ohio State would have just taken the freaking bumper lanes off of him. And again, it wasn't his fault. It's what he's getting coached. It's not like Justin can sit there and be like, hey, I think we need to run this. Haas, they're not going to listen to that. So that's where it's like, dude,
everything was walk cross. Everything was walk cross.
So bad watching some of it. It's like you have this kid who's going through progressions at a high level. Mm-hmm. Give him some stuff that's going to stress this defense, and then let him alert out of it. I don't know. It just pissed me off because I legitimately think if you put Justin Fields at Texas A&M with Jimbo, I really think that he pushes for QB1. Now, Trevor Lawrence, because of his freshman year, was basically just, hey, he's good to go. But I honestly think Justin, I think he's pushing for QB1 because they see him run all the concepts. That's why Kellen Mond went so dang high, I think. Yeah. But I agree with you, man. I think Fields is incredible. I thought Nagy's system, I didn't think it was very good until I did a deep dive on it last week. And I just think, I wish Mitch the best. I hope he does great. I hope he figures it out after his stop in Buffalo. But I think Nagy was doing some great stuff, and I just think, unfortunately, it wasn't getting executed. Who's kind of, who else are you excited about in terms of, hey, where they ended up landing? Trey Lance to San Francisco, I think is super interesting. But kind of who's next after Justin that you're kind of pumped up about?
Oh, it's Trey Lance without question. And, whenever you can land with an elite play caller like a Kyle Shanahan. And I think the what's so different about Trey's landing spot is that the situation is already perfect for him. They just needed to drop a quarterback in there that was really talented. Like, they have a really good offensive line. They have an elite play caller, and then he has some outstanding playmakers. Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, all those guys that George Kittle, of course, as well. So he already has those playmakers around him, and then he's not going to be forced into action right away. They have that bridge option available for him with Jimmy G. And, a lot of people say he's not ready, but we both know the only way to gain experience and to learn the NFL game is to be out there with those live bullets coming at you. So I think by like the 10th or the 11th game, if they're struggling a little bit, they're probably going to want to put him out there just because he's so talented, man. And it's not just as a thrower, it's as a runner too. And we talk about the design run game with Fields. I think Lance just takes it to another level just because of his experience with it. And, they kind of tied his hands a little bit in the NDSU offense. He only had 2 games, I believe it was, in his career of where he had 25 plus passing attempts. So everything was 11 and 12 personnel, double tight end sets, just running it down your throat, and then quarterback power right behind it. So just opening things up a little bit more for him. I think Kyle Shanahan is going to flourish with him, man. I'm excited about it.
That's where I did like Justin a little bit more than Trey. Was you kind of felt like everywhere Justin went, the game was at his hands. And it's not Trey's fault, right? That NDSU is one of the best counter and power teams on planet Earth. It's not his fault. But that's where I did kind of think what's your opinion? I find this fascinating right now because there's a lot of people pushing, hey, Trey Lance shouldn't play this year. And to me, it's like you said, the only way to get experience in the NFL is to play in the NFL. What's kind of your take on, and I think he's an interesting case because he didn't play last year really either, right? He had the one game, and now you're talking about, okay, 2.5 years off of real football. And from playing quarterback, we have a different level of practice, right? Boy, did I look good in 7-on-7 when I was with St. Louis, right? When I was with the Rams, I looked great in 7-on-7 because I know I ain't getting hit. When I all of a sudden ran out against the Denver Broncos, I did not look great. So I think it's, it's a little different. What's kind of your take on that? Do you think, obviously, if the kid's not ready, he's not ready, right? But I do think there's a way in which you can push him. Kind of what would your thought process be if you were dropped as that O coordinator and you were kind of giving feedback to Kyle, what would your thought process be on that?
It honestly just depends on how he looks in practice, and then I think the
Yeah.
preseason is going to be big for him as well, just because I think that's the only time where you can really assimilate as far as what he's going to see in an actual game, as far as in preseason, as far as start him in a preseason game just to see how he looks against that first or second unit. So I think when those live bullets start flying for him, that's really the only way you're going to be able to get a gauge on him, just because we both know practice is completely different from the game, especially when we're talking about the NFL. And, a guy like Trey that basically has had 2 years off, you want him to get as many reps as possible, especially learning a brand new system. The speed of the game is going to be much different for him coming from the FCS level going to the NFL level. And, I know he's a mobile quarterback, but mental processing is something that is just repetitions with quarterback. And,
Right.
Kyle likes to incorporate some RPO things, but there's only so many RPOs that you can run in the NFL before you have to read full field and then half field read types of concepts. So I think just depending on how quickly he's able to grasp things. And I mean, if he's able to grab it right away, then let him go, man. Auction Jimmy G off.
Yeah.
We know this guy's the future. You traded basically 3 first-round picks
Yeah.
for him. So let him take the wings and go if he's ready. Don't be scared.
What I think's overrated too is the idea that, hey, there's certain guys that are ready for the NFL and certain guys that aren't. Let's be honest, like no one's ready. The NFL is just so different from college, especially now. Modern college football is so simplified comparatively to the NFL. And who we credit as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time from a football IQ perspective being Peyton Manning. Like he threw like 40 interceptions, right?
Yeah.
Not that, but he threw
28.
so many his rookie year. So it's like, I don't think anybody's ready. So I think the quicker you get him out there, I think the better. And obviously you don't want to rush him, but we're not talking about David Carr, right? We're talking about a kid who to me is a great passer and everything. Kind of the last guy that went in the first round who's going to a place that, isn't a coaching change is Mac Jones. What do you make of that situation? And then if you've had a chance to watch Cam, kind of how do you think that's going to shake out? Because that's something that I'm fascinated by, because I thought Cam had a pretty darn good start to the season. So kind of what's your take, one, on Mac fitting in New England, but then two, kind of how's that dynamic going to play out in your opinion?
I think the most interesting thing about this is that when, we've both been coaches before, whenever you see both of those guys standing beside each other in training camp, it's going to look like polar opposites. You got this 6'6", 250-pound alien, and then we've both seen the pictures of Mac Jones with the shirt off. So, and then we know Cam, even though his arm isn't as strong as what it once was in Carolina, he still has a super strong arm.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he's one of the rare specimens of where he could just use his upper body torque to just throw rockets. So I think that's going to be the real interesting part about it. And McDaniels is going to have his hands full, man, just because you talk about polar opposites as quarterbacks. Cam Newton and Mac Jones, that's polar opposites in a quarterback room. So whenever they do end up making the switch to Mac Jones, if it does end up happening this year, next year, I think it's going to be interesting to see how McDaniels does flip the switch as far as how he has to change his offense, just because you're not running any quarterback design runs for Mac Jones like you're going to do with Cam Newton, just because we know that's how Cam really likes to get involved in the game. That's how he kind of warms up a little bit as far as, getting in the mix with the quarterback run game and then the RPOs. And then Cam is really good. I think he's really thrived on throwing like outward breaking routes. That's really been his forte, out routes, comebacks, and then he'll throw an occasional seam. He's been kind of inaccurate throughout his career. He's had that Greg Olsen as security blanket. So those outbreaking routes, that's always been his forte. And I think that's going to be the interesting part about him, is just can he get more accurate over the middle of the field, which probably isn't going to happen just because he's in the late stages of his career. But I think just how McDaniels decides to flip the switch with this offense, just because there's so many different ways that you have to design the offense for a Mac Jones as compared to a Cam Newton, just because we both know Mac is really good as far as his footwork and then, climbing into the eye of the storm of the pocket and then finding new windows within it. But as far as getting out of harm's way consistently and escaping around the exterior rim of the pocket, that's just not his forte. So I think how, as far as the different concepts that they draw up for him, as far as, flipping the switch from Cam Newton, if they do decide to do that this year or next year, I think that's going to be the interesting part.
I'm fascinated by how do you even develop the system, right? Because I was thinking about it from a coach's perspective. I'm fascinated. I'm sitting in there, and there's no quarterback run game you can use with Mac.
No.
Like none. So I'm sitting there and it's like, man, how do you even create it? Or do you just create it by and large of, hey, here's our pass game and then here's our QB run game and we're going to strip this out. It's going to be fascinating how they create it. I was watching a bunch of New England stuff and what they did with Cam to kind of see how Mac fits there. You know, that's where I was kind of like, as I'm watching Cam, I'm thinking to myself, he was having a great year. There was just certain stuff he was struggling with. You know, to me, the biggest thing that jumped off the tape was when New England's all about condensed sets.
Yeah.
And he was having a hard time identifying, hey, where's the pressure coming from? But who can blame him? He went from Auburn, which is completely spread with Gus, to Carolina, which I don't know if I saw a single condensed set in his whole career there. It was all spread, and then they used Christian out of the backfield. So it was like, man, I get why he was struggling with that look, and he picked it up towards the end of the year. So it's going to be fascinating because I do think Cam's a guy who can I think he's a guy who can then figure it out and look like he did when he, to me, carried the Carolina Panthers to a Super Bowl. So it'll be interesting to see what shakes out. And then, you know, if he does struggle, is Mac get the nod? And I don't know. It'll be interesting. I'm excited for Mac Jones there because I do think he's a fit from that kind of modified quick game stuff they do.
Yeah.
And a lot of that timing stuff that we saw Brady be successful with. So I think he's a fit from that perspective. But no, you're right, man. That training camp photo is going to be funny when it comes out and it's, you know, them both shirtless during conditioning because they're going to look a little bit different.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
So, you know, because you've been studying all these quarterbacks for a long time, who's kind of the quarterback in the NFL that's maybe, you know, not the Mahomes, not in that upper echelon that you feel like, hey, man, he could make a jump and really start to do something? Who's the kid that you're kind of on the lookout for who's not a rookie, who you think can kind of make that next step up into a different category, or just keep his success? Maybe a kid like Justin Herbert, who's kind of on your radar next year that was in the NFL last year?
There's really three that come to mind. The first one is Daniel Jones with the Giants, just because of what they've surrounded him with this year. They went out and got Kenny Galladay and then also Kadarius Toney as well. And I mean, he has a loaded team as far as offensive weapons. Saquon's coming back this year as well. And we know what he's capable of as far as a runner and then out of the backfield as well. Turnovers has been like his biggest bugaboo as far as fumbling in the pocket, timely interceptions, costly interceptions at bad moments. So they go out and get the big-time pass catcher over the middle of the field and then over the deep portions as well. In Galladay, they have the short, shifty slot guy in Kadarius Toney. And then they still have Sterling Shepard as well, who I think is a good player as well. So they have a lot of different types of wide receivers. Now it's just a matter of Daniel Jones, what I like to call KYP. You just have to know his personnel and get it to his playmakers, just because, I mean, he has a litany of weapons. Their offensive line is still a little bit shaky. They're a little bit young up front at the tackles, Andrew Thomas and then Matthew Pert as well. We'll see if they can take a significant growth in their second year. So if they can protect him, I'm looking to see if he can, you know, alleviate some of those turnover issues that he has had in years past, just because I think Gettleman, for as much flack as he takes, I think he's done a good job of surrounding Daniel Jones with weapons. And then the other two that comes to mind that are in new situations, Sam Darnold with the Panthers, him and Joe Brady. Yeah. I think that's going to be a really nice pairing for Sam. Offensive line is still a big question mark for them. But as far as the weapons, I think this is the best surrounding cast that he has had. Christian McCaffrey, once again, we know receiving wise and then also rushing wise, what he's capable of. DJ Moore is another really good player as well. And they just drafted Terrace Marshall from LSU, who I think is going to be a good player for them as well. And then the last one is Carson Wentz, him getting back to some familiarity back in Indianapolis with Frank Reich. I think we could see him, you know, he was kind of broken last year. I don't think he ever got out of Nick Foles' shadow. I think that was just too much for him to overcome. And then we know if you're playing bad in Philadelphia, the media is going to get to you, man. It's going to get to you. So we know Indy has a little bit more of much more of a relaxed media. There's not going to be as much more eyes on him. So I think familiarity is going to be big for him getting back with Frank Reich. I think, I don't know if he's going to return to his MVP form, but I think he's going to play better than what he did a year ago.
I love that. Yeah, I think Carson's going to be I think he'll be interesting, but I wholeheartedly agree. I think anytime someone comes in and wins a Super Bowl, I think from then on, you're just kind of like in his shadow a little bit. That's tough. I'm excited to see how Jameis does in New Orleans, because I do think this is the first real opportunity. Everything's been set up for him to be successful. Tampa was a decent situation with when Bruce first got there, but I think they didn't have the level of weapons that obviously they have now. But I do think, in New Orleans with Sean Payton, you can't help but be excited. And when your quarterback competition is, Ian from Notre Dame, who I wasn't super high on, and then Taysom Hill, you got to be excited. Like
Right.
It's tough to get a quarterback room like that in the NFL.
Right.
So I think he's a guy that I'm excited to see what happens. Let's kind of shift back to playing quarterback. What's maybe one thing that you've learned, and whether it be from your time coaching, playing, or evaluating these guys, what's one thing that you kind of wish you knew as a younger quarterback, when you were coming up, whether it's, film study habits, or what's kind of one thing that you wish you knew when you were a younger guy?
Oh, that's a really good question. So something that I learned as a coach is just understanding coverages a little bit more in depth. And what I mean by that is, we were coming out of high school. We all knew what cover one, cover two, cover three, cover four, the list goes on and on, cover zero, these different coverages. But I don't think a lot of us knew like the certain weaknesses of the coverages and how
Yeah.
you can attack each and every one. So that would be some advice that I would give to young quarterbacks is not only understand the coverages, but understand the weak points of the coverages as well. Like with cover four, we know they're trying to keep everything in front of them. So if you see that cornerback outside, 5 to 7 yards off, don't be scared to rip that hitch out there real quick, just because you
Yeah.
know that corner is going to get back. Cover two, we know what I like to call the honey hole in between the safety and the corner, and then also the middle of the field. That's the weak points of cover two. So just understanding the weak points of the coverage and not just understanding how to draw up the coverages. And then also, how you can get yourself in some advantageous situations when you see these coverages as well. Getting pre-snap and post-snap reads. I think that's something that a lot of young quarterbacks fail to do. They see the coverage pre-snap, but when those safeties rock and roll and they roll from cover four to cover three, you're so fixated on what the pre-snap picture was, you don't understand what the post-snap picture was. So little things like that, pre and post-snap reads, and just understanding the pressure points or the different ways that you can attack certain coverages.
What was one thing that helped you with that? Was it just, hey, studying more tape as a coach, or was it talking to some defensive oriented type guys? Kind of what helped you take yourself to that next level with understanding coverages?
Being a graduate assistant. 75% of what I know about football, I learned when I was a graduate assistant. And every time I used to break down film a couple weeks ahead, I was like, man, I wish I knew half of what I knew now as a player. So just breaking down film, and it's not just coverages. You're seeing different types of blitzes as well. In high school, the basic stuff. In college, the basic types of blitzes. But, I didn't know much about fire zone and, all these different types of zone blitzes and corner cat. And I didn't know about all this stuff coming into college, coming out of high school. So you just learn different types of blitzes and also different types of coverages, just because defensive coordinators are really creative now. And, a lot of those guys are tired of getting burned by RPOs and, four verts out of trip sets and empty. So you're seeing all these different types of blitzes and all this other stuff. I didn't know about, cross dog blitzes and double A gap pressures. And, I didn't know about all this stuff coming out of high school. So coaching and breaking down film and labeling film, that really helped me a ton.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. Something that they talked to us a ton about when I was in St. Louis, it was not even necessarily, right, the vulnerability in the defense, but the exact player, right? Who can you stress the most? Is it the nickel Sam in cover three? Can you really get him to jump the flat and then take the curl? They were like, hey, how can we stress this specific player? And then those guys are so good at game planning, right? That not only did they, hey, we're going to stress this guy, or we're going to stress this part of the defense, but we're going to stress this exact guy because, right, at that level, it's, hey, can we just gain an inch here or there? But I love what you said, and I think any kid can apply that and just study it more and even talk to their D coordinator at their high school, because maybe he'll have a good understanding of, hey, here's why they do certain things. So that's awesome. The last thing before I let you go, kind of when you're looking at this 2022 class, because a lot of what I've been seeing, and to be honest, I haven't watched a single one of them, so we got to take your word for it. A lot of people have been saying this 2021 class was just exponentially better. What's your early take on 2022? Is there anyone that kind of jumped off the tape? The only kid that I've watched at all really is the Levi Lewis kid at Louisiana, and I thought he was a stud, and I've only seen a couple clips. Kind of what's your early thoughts on the 2022 class?
So I've only watched three guys, Spencer Rattler, Sam Howell, and then the kid at Nevada, Carson Strong, who's kind of flying under the radar a little bit right now. So, they're all raw. Spencer's really, really raw in a sense just because Lincoln's offense consists of a lot of what I like to call all or nothing throws.
Yeah.
So everything's attacking the deep portion of the field. Like he has a play where he loves to run. He has a double post, and then he brings like an under route underneath, what I like to call a dash route that
Yep.
like it kills cover four. Like the corner
Yeah.
runs with the post, and then the backside dash just comes and is wide open every single time. So there's a lot of all or nothing throws, but what happens with that is he gets stuck a lot of times. Just when teams play strictly cover four, to keep everything in front of him, so he doesn't have an outlet for a check down. So it looks like a lot of times he's holding onto the ball, but he just doesn't have anywhere to go with it. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier, his footwork doesn't matches a lot of times with quick game just because they stretch the field so much vertically. When he has to grip it and rip it or, turn what I like to call turn two, like a shortstop, he's just not used to
Yeah.
doing it just because everything's attacking vertically so much. So he has some footwork things to clean up. But I think the potential is definitely there for him to take the next step. And then he has some turnover issues that he suffered from last year as well. He got benched, I believe, was like the second or third game of the year against Texas, but he came back. He came back and won the game. I think that was a turning point for him. So just seeing that type of mental psyche for him was big, and I think it really turned things around for him. Sam Howell, not a super good athlete by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just so hard to get a good gauge on him just because everything is RPO based. Like everything is
Yeah.
mesh fake, pull the ball out and just throw the quick slant behind the linebacker that's coming to attack the first level. So it's really hard to get a feel for him as far as can he read and process, even have field reads, just because we know what that Phil Longo system when he was at Ole Miss, everything is RPO based. Everything. Like even like they're running outside zone away. If the backside hitch, if the corner is back, he's throwing the backside hitch right away. So just little things like that. It's just hard to get a feel for him. And I was looking up some stats. I believe it was Sports Info Solutions. Mac Jones was the second highest guy in the country as far as RPO based throws with 73. Sam Howell was number one with 110 throws that were RPO based last year. So that just goes to show you of how many RPOs they were throwing last year. So I just want to see now with him losing his top two options and De'Ami Brown and Daz Newsome, both of those guys ended up being day two or day three draft picks. Now they're playing with some younger guys on the outside. So I want to see if they're going to be running some true concepts this year as opposed to so many RPOs. And then Carson Strong, he's intriguing. He does. I'm just not a huge fan of guys that can't get out of harm's way as far as your old school. Um, he's not a statue, but he does struggle getting out of harm's way a little bit. But as far as I think he can throw the deep ball, he has like B plus arm strength for the most part. But he's in that air raid system. Everything is mesh concepts, double crossers from each side of the field, a lot of shallow routes, drive concept, flood to the sideline. So there's not a lot asked of him. And then they run a lot of perimeter screens as well, out of a quad set and then out of trips as well. He's just throwing it out there right away to the outside guy. So it's a relatively easy offense. So I want to see if they put a little bit more on his plate this year. But I haven't seen enough guys, honestly, to call it weak. I know a lot of people are really down on it right now, and I think that's kind of premature a little bit, just because every year there's that guy that comes out of nowhere. Joe Burrow, Zach Wilson, and there's going to be a guy like that this year, just because it happens every year. So I'm not quick to say it's weak or anything like that. I just like to call it TBD, to be determined.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. All you can do is watch. And it is frustrating, though, when you see some of these guys and you're like, I wish I could see some actual concepts versus all the RPO stuff. So, Jordan, man, I appreciate you. This was a blast. We'll have to have you back. But make sure you guys are following Jordan on everything on Twitter. Make sure you're tuning into his Reid Option podcast. That's on Apple and everything, right?
Yep, every single podcast platform.
Yep, awesome. So make sure you're tuning in, and then make sure you subscribe to us. Give us a 5-star review, and we appreciate you guys. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Tim. It was a pleasure.